The Joint Subcommittee will come to order. Congresswoman Carol Shea Porter, a member of the full committee, has requested permission to join us today during this important briefing. Without objection, I would like to make it in order for her to participate. So moved. Today, the Seapower and Expeditionary Forces Committee joins the Air and Land Forces Subcommittee to receive testimony on the current status of the Mine-Resistant Ambush Protected Vehicle, or MRAP. This hearing continues our formal series of official oversight activities on the mine-resistant vehicle. Force protection will always be at the forefront of these subcommittee meetings, and it brings us here today. The United States of America has over 164,000 troops still operating in Iraq. Improvised explosive devices constitute about 70% or responsible for about 70% of the casualties in Iraq. And regrettably, more than half of those, or close to half of those, are caused from underbelly attacks on vehicles in Iraq. The MRAP family of vehicles offers significantly more protection and survivability for our troops. This is due to several factors, such as the vehicle height, the increased weight of the vehicle, the V-shaped underbody, which help deflect the force of blast away from the body of the vehicle. We are aware that a total integrated approach using all available technologies to combat IEDs is vital. But the last line of defense for our troops in the IED chain is an armored vehicle. Right now, MRAP should be that vehicle. It's no secret that I, along with many other members of this committee, have not been satisfied with the response of this administration to force protection needs of our troops. During our last hearing, we raised concerns over settling an artificially low theater requirement, repeating past mistakes in terms of vehicle production, adequately mobilizing the industrial base, and failing to properly fund the program. 3 weeks ago, I had the pleasure of meeting with Secretary Young in my office. The information he briefed me on showed me a substantial improvement in DoD's execution of the mine-resistant vehicle program. At the time of the July 19th hearing, just over 240 MRAPs had been produced, and only 176 of them fielded to Iraq. There was an unfunded requirement of over $5 billion. Today, over 1,500 MRAPs have been produced, and close to 700 vehicles have been fielded. The Department of Defense requirements now stands at over 15,000 vehicles, up from the initial request by this administration just 1 year ago of only 4,000. The amended supplemental now requests full funding for this new equipment. From day one, Congress has said to tell us what it will take for MRAP, and we'll provide the money you need. We want to reiterate that statement. Now is not the time to be complacent. We still have major production fielding and sustainment challenges ahead of us. Over the next 2 months, there will be a steep increase in the production of MRAPs. Over the next 2 months, production is scheduled to jump from 440 vehicles per month to a steady 1,100 per month. This 700 vehicle increase is critical to the MRAP fielding, and these subcommittees seek to be reassured that this increase will proceed without a hitch. If there are any potential problems that might disrupt these ambitious goals, now is the time to state those concerns so that we can help mitigate them. The subcommittee expect to be reassured that industry has been mobilized to meet these ambitious production goals. The issue of MRAPs goes a heck of a lot farther than just vehicles, than people on production lines and kids in theater. This young man is Sean Cooley, and to my knowledge, he was the first Mississippi Guardsman to die. He was deployed in February of February of 05, his unit, the 155th, and he died in a Humvee from a blast from underneath that vehicle. A few months later, the day after Easter to be exact, this young man, William Brooks, was the driver of a Humvee. His vehicle was blown up again from a blast from underneath. William lost both legs. To tell you what a unique individual this young man is, he was saved by the heroic work of Sergeant Anthony and another sergeant who were able to get 2 tourniquets on him in less than a minute. While recovering from his wounds at Walter Reed, William volunteered to help in my office to man the phone after Hurricane Katrina. William is seen in this shot on his prostheses, and his short-term goal is to finish Mississippi State University and to walk across the stage to get his diploma on these legs. I think the sad fact is that Sean would probably be alive and William would probably have his legs if MRAPs had been fielded sooner. Now, there are 168,000 Seans and Williams in theater today. So if this committee loses its temper, gets a little short for people who aren't working as fast as we think they should, or funding that isn't there when it should be, I hope you understand why. I've had the pleasure to visit 2 of the facilities that are building MRAPs in the past week. I want to first say, as someone who's worked on a production line, I was impressed by how hard the individuals were working. There's absolutely no complaint there. I was not impressed by the facilities themselves. There was good equipment. There was a pretty good plan. But quite frankly, particularly what was done at Seapower, where they're putting the government-furnished equipment onto these vehicles, looked more like a custom cycle shop than Honda mass-producing motorcycles. This isn't a jobs program. This isn't about feathering somebody's nest or putting some jobs in somebody's district. This is a rescue mission. The most likely way for a young person serving our country at Iraq or Afghanistan to die or be maimed is from an underbody blast to a Humvee. We know that, and the enemy knows that. And we've got to solve that problem. Now, as someone who has been through a product of base closure and having to lay off 1,300 people in my district, believe me, I understand the misery of having to let people go. But this isn't a jobs program, and we want the vendors to know this. We want the Congress to know this, and above all, we want the troops to know this is a rescue mission. And we're expecting the folks to tell us today how they're going to perform this mission quickly, efficiently, and then we move on to other challenges that face our nation. With that, I yield to the ranking member, with the subcommittee chairman of Air and Land, Mr. Abercrombie.
Thank you very much, Gene. At our hearing July 1st, I indicated we were having difficulties reconciling MRAP Vehicle Program Office provided data on production schedules. At the time, I noted this as indicative of the challenges involved with a program of this size moving at such a rapid pace. Since July, the program office and the department seem to have made significant improvement in responding to those difficulties in providing accurate information, and I commend that effort. However, the MRAP vehicle program continues to present a major acquisition challenge that has broader implications regarding the Department of Defense's tactical vehicle acquisition strategy, expected future combat environments, and of course how that relates to future budget requirements. Mr. Chairman, I don't propose at this hearing to pursue with our guests today the question of capital budgeting, but I can assure you that at some point we have to come to grips in the Department of Defense, and the Congress has to come to grips with the question of how we finance what we're doing, particularly in capital acquisition of assets such as MRAPs. We have to have a differentiation between a capital budget and an operational budget. And failure to do that, I think, is severely undermining everything that Mr. Young, for example, is going to try to accomplish, I can assure you. We'll pursue that at another time, but I think it's fair to say that at almost not quite subliminal level in today's hearing, the question of how we finance affects policy with regard to what we finance and when we finance it. In any event, not so many months ago, the Army was reluctant to embrace major procurement for MRAP vehicles and has only recently done so with the caveat that the MRAP program is not a program of record, indicating that the MRAP vehicles only apply to the current circumstances in Iraq and implying possibly no further use of the vehicles after their use in Iraq. Now, I know that that's not necessarily the full intention, but and for those who are not necessarily familiar with what a program of record is and why we have it and what its implications are, this may seem a bit esoteric, but I think it's fundamental to our discussion, not just only about MRAPs, but in the broader discussion that I've already alluded to. I'm perfectly aware of the fact that the Army is going to have further uses and sees a bigger picture, but is also constrained by the institutional requirements that it has, especially if it does not have a program of record, precisely because you get into conflicts over what gets funded and when. Given that the Department of Defense has determined that the MRAP vehicles are its #1 acquisition requirement of the moment, how is it that it appears that expected future combat environments are so much different that an MRAP-like vehicle capability will not be required? Now, again, I won't pursue that at any great length during this hearing, but I can assure you that I'm going to need, and I think the committee is going to need, the committees will need, some indication as to why these kinds of vehicles with the kind of armament protection that is proposed and the design protocols that are proposed will not be useful in multiple environments where urban warfare, guerrilla warfare, the current kind of proclivities of those who we might find ourselves in conflict with might be utilizing. DoD has also characterized the MRAP as a major defense acquisition program in the highest category, with Secretary Young as the primary acquisition executive, which parenthetically I will say I'm very happy with and glad of, which probably sends him on a path of doom almost immediately. I am curious as to why shouldn't this program be considered a program of record? Where do the MRAP vehicles fit into future tactical wheeled acquisitions? Will the fiscal year 2009 budget and future years defense program include appropriate levels of operations and maintenance funding for the MRAP vehicle inventory? If we're going to make demands on the private manufacturing sector of this nation, they need to know just exactly what it is that we want, what kind of priority are we giving it, and what plans can they make accordingly. That's absolutely fundamental, it seems to me, if we're going to ask the nation to mobilize on behalf of the soldiers that Gene has indicated are utterly and totally and completely dependent on our good judgment. I might note that the Stryker vehicle was once considered an interim solution. I think that bears repeating, Mr. Chairman. Other instances can be cited where something of the instance became something of permanence. Given the planned $25 billion commitment to MRAP vehicles, a commitment that is likely to grow if history holds precedent, and given the lack of proven armored technology that significantly changes current correlation between weight, height, and vehicle protection, we had better plan on MRAP vehicles as more than an interim throwaway solution for force protection. I'm also curious as to when and how MRAP-2 vehicles fit into the current strategy and what impacts this program will have on the industrial supply base. Will the MRAP-2 vehicle program be a program of record? One other issue is that the MRAP program is this program is highlighted is that of and which is of continuing concern to me, is fundamental to the broader issue of joint programs. Many of the current defense acquisition programs are called joint programs. Anytime, by the way, I'm sorry to say, Mr. Young, I keep looking at you here. I'm sorry to say, every time I see the word joint in front of it, I figure, uh-oh, the smoke screen is going up. We're going to use the word joint, and then we'll watch all the infighting take place. They're labeled as joint programs, as I said. However, when you peel back a layer, you find the program is really joint only in name. While MRAP vehicles are being procured jointly, there is a lack of standardization among the mission essential equipment being integrated into the vehicles. The MRAP vehicles are all being used against the same threat in similar operational environments, yet each military service and Special Operations Command has its own specific equipment package. As a result, a facility doing the installation work is potentially having to integrate at least, as by my count now, 24 different vehicle configurations. I don't see how that can be done. I'm not sure that should be done. I'm open. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an automotive engineer, certainly not an expert in this by any stretch of the imagination in terms of manufacture and configurations. But it strikes me that 24 different vehicle configurations, at a minimum, causes enormous logistical difficulties for the manufacturer and those we're asking to do the production. Let alone what the doctrinal implications of that are in terms of jointness. As monthly production numbers increase dramatically, these many configurations could generate, I believe, major problems once the basic vehicles are delivered to where the final integration is done. Ultimately, this, I think, will result in delay in the vehicles being delivered to Iraq or elsewhere. If there was one standardized mission equipment package, or at least fewer configurations than currently planned for all the services in the Special Operation Command, this could potentially accelerate, I believe, the installation process and in turn get more vehicles to Iraq and elsewhere at a much faster rate. It's imperative, in my judgment, that the civilian leadership in the Department of Defense effectively address the problem of joint acquisition programs, which may be in name only. I'm hoping the witnesses today will be able to respond to these issues, particularly the programs of record and the question of joint acquisition programs and their efficacy, and assure the subcommittees that every option is being pursued to produce and field these vehicles, since what we're really discussing today, as the Chairman has so eloquently expressed, the protection of our men and women in uniform. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Abercrombie. The Chair now recognizes the Ranking Member and former Chairman of the Seapower Subcommittee, Mr. Bartlett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I also want to thank our panels for being with us today. Mr. Chairman, thank you for continuing to have these MRAP hearings. The information we learn is invaluable. During the last two MRAP hearings, I mentioned in my opening statements that I wanted to hear assurances from our witnesses that the industrial base was being positioned to support this critical MRAP requirement. Based on the increased requirement and the recent decision to down-select from 5 to 3 MRAP vendors, I still have questions about the industrial base, and I'm very pleased that we have two distinguished panels before us today that can address my concerns. We need to gain a better understanding of any industrial base constraints and what mitigating measures are being pursued in order to remedy potential choke points. Again, thank you for being here, and I look forward to your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Bartlett. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Ranking Member of the Airland, Mr. Saxon.
Today he's the cleanup guy. The cleanup guy.
Okay.
Thank you all for being here. This is indeed an important hearing and an important topic. I often think to myself of the changes, the dramatic changes in warfare that have occurred since I first sat here in this room at hearings like this one. And today is a hearing that is intended to help us develop the capability to deal with some of those changes. The MRAP program obviously is important for those reasons. At the end of the day, I think we need to know the following. Number one is the recent decision to down-select from 5 to 3 vendors in the best interest of our warfighters. 2 is the defense industrial base postured to meet the current requirement of approximately 15,000 MRAPs, and by when? And 3, what are the potential bottlenecks, and how can we help alleviate them if there are some? And finally, 4, have we provided you with the necessary funding in a timely manner to execute all of the necessary requirements that you have? I'd like to just for a moment turn to another subject. As I mentioned just a minute ago, things change quite rapidly. One of the changes that I've seen happen is that this year we will spend approximately 70% of our defense budget on operations and support and 30% on modernization. This is different. In 1985, this was not the case. In the 1980s, we spent about 55% of our budget on operations and support and 45% on modernization. We established a 30% modernization budget in the 1990s, and that's where we are today. Recently, General Casey and Secretary Garin were here, and their message was that the Army is out of balance. I believe that it's not just the Army that's out of balance. I believe that it's our defense structure that's out of balance, and it seems to me that the situation we are in today in terms of our tactical wheeled vehicle fleet is a microcosm of this out-of-balance theme. And without prolonging this, let me just say that it seems to me that as we proceed down the road with MRAP, which we all believe is a necessary element to protect our warfighters and help them be successful, we also have recognized, as one of the previous speakers said, that MRAP doesn't provide us with all the answers. has problems in urban terrain. It has problems being agile. And it seems to us, or it seems to me at least, that we need a fleet of MRAP-type vehicles, or at least with MRAP-type armor, with different capabilities to enable our warfighters to do the variety of tasks that we expect them to do. This is not the place to talk about a future program, but I want to make sure that in the future, regardless of the type of mission environment that these light tactical vehicles must go into, that every soldier and every Marine has MRAP-like or better protection, not just the heaviest variants. In other words, the lighter vehicles that we have armored up today have some advantages. The MRAP-type vehicle also has some advantages, but they all can't do the same mission. And so it seems to me that what we ought to be looking at beyond today, beyond today's hearing, is a vision for where we need to go with armored vehicles and the various types of missions that we expect our warfighters to carry out with them. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks to the gentleman from New Jersey. We are very, very fortunate to have a very distinguished panel of witnesses today, and I mean that. We're also very lucky to have each of you gentlemen working for our nation, and I hope you understand that. First is the Honorable John Young, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, and Director of the MRAP Task Force. Second is Mr. Bill Greenwald, Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Industrial Policy. Third is Captain Red Hoover, United States Navy Commanding Officer, Space and Naval Warfare Center, pronounced SPAWAR, in Charleston, South Carolina. Mr. Young, we've got about 10 minutes before we have to go for these votes. It's going to be 3 votes. That's going to kill about a half an hour, I regret to say. But so I will leave it up to you. If you'd like to get started now, we would welcome that. If you prefer to wait, we can do that too.
Mr. Chairman, it's okay. I'll make a brief opening statement, probably well less than 10 minutes, and then proceed as you will.
Chair recognizes Undersecretary of Defense.
Chairman Taylor, Chairman Abercrombie, Ranking Members Bartlett and Saxon, and distinguished members of the subcommittees, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle program with you again. I will try to be brief while highlighting a few key points. Since I last appeared before you, Secretary Gates has continued to push the department to build and deliver the maximum number of MRAPs possible this year. In response, the MRAP team has labored tirelessly to move forward aggressively while ensuring the quality and effectiveness of these vehicles in theater. The Congress has truly been integral in our MRAP efforts. The Congress moved the MRAP reprogramming in days, provided $5.2 billion in a continuing resolution, and has included $11.2 billion in the FY08 Defense Appropriations Conference Report. These are unprecedented actions. With these funds, we are making significant progress in delivery and production of MRAPs. In December 2006, we had the industrial capacity to build less than 10 MRAP vehicles per month. We produced 161 vehicles in July. Between October 1st and November 4th, we have taken delivery of about 550 vehicles. We are closing in on our goal of producing roughly 1,100 MRAPs per month by the end of the calendar year. In doing so, the Defense Industrial Base is displaying remarkable agility and exceeding commercial industrial standards. For example, I'm told that Toyota took 3 years from concept to manufacturing to reach a rate of 2,000 vehicles per month for the Prius hybrid vehicle. Our industry partners are leaning forward to accelerate deliveries, and the men and women serving this nation are counting on their continued success. The MRAP program is perhaps the most significant rapid acquisition program the Department has conducted since the end of World War II. And as a result, we are constantly confronted with new challenges. If we execute our plans, we will build over 15,000 MRAPs by October of 2008. With each challenge, the Department has proved to have the agility to adapt and react. The dedicated MRAP team has worked to address the availability of steel, tires, axles, transportation to theater and within theater, government-furnished equipment installation, spare parts, maintenance, operator training, and all the other issues necessary for the program to deliver reliable, safe, and survivable vehicles. Our unprecedented journey will inevitably include challenges we cannot foresee today, but everyone is committed to fielding these vehicles on time. We know our warfighters are counting on us. I want to recognize and thank all the members of the MRAP enterprise, starting with Paul Mann of the Joint MRAP Program Office and his team, General Brogan and the Marine Corps Systems Command, the vehicle manufacturers and their raw material and subcomponent suppliers, the men and women of Space and Naval Warfare Systems Center Charleston, the entire network of transportation professionals represented by the U.S. Transportation Command, the vast network of logistics experts from the Pentagon to Iraq, and the talented military and civilian staff in the services and the Office of the Secretary of Defense involved with this program. Finally, I would again like to thank you and the other members of Congress and their staffs for your clear and unambiguous support for this vital program. Together, we should be able to increase and maintain a high level of production, fielding, and sustainment of these vehicles and provide them to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Secretary Young. Will there be any other members of your panel speaking?
No, sir.
Secretary Young, again, thank you for being here, and I do value your service and each of the panelists' service to our nation. My frustration comes in that it was about 2 years ago when a former head of the Army Liaison Office came to me, Colonel Liddick, and said, you know what, we need to be doing better. That the South Africans came up with a vehicle 20 years ago to deflect mine blasts, that the Russians came up with that in approximately the same timeline. And here we were then 2 years into a very conflict in Iraq where people were dying on a daily basis, and we as a nation had not responded. Like everyone else in this room, I'm pleased that finally we're getting in alignment, but I'm still not convinced that we're doing everything that we can do. Like I said, I was able to visit a facility in Charleston last week. I was able to go to Seapower. In both instances, I saw people who were working hard, and I know the difference between people going through the motions and people working hard. These guys were working hard, and these ladies were working hard. There was a lot of good equipment on those production lines, and I would invite each of the members of those committees to take the opportunity to visit not only that plant, but the other plants. But as someone who came from manufacturing, what I didn't see was that process being done in the most expeditious manner. Congressman Abercrombie touched on it, and he raised an excellent point. Why are there 24 different variants? Not that long ago, a former Secretary of the Navy came before the committee and talked about the need to build ships or build anything, airplanes, in series. When we are trying to rush something to the theater so that people don't lose their life or their limbs, what in the heck are we doing coming up with 24 variants? Because there's a part of me that says somebody's trying to do this on the cheap. Why don't we just build the best variant and make it available, and those people don't need all those features, just don't use them. I will use the example that I tend to buy common cars. I've got an old Chevrolet Malibu. It's got the same wiring harness as if I had bought every nice option for that vehicle. Because the folks at GM know that it's cheaper just to buy a whole lot of one thing, to run it through that factory, and then if you need those additional wires for things, then they're there. So why are we coming up with the equivalent of 24 different wiring harnesses? Why are we coming up with so many different shapes? And believe me, I very much appreciate, and I want the American people to appreciate the difficulty of your task. I could very quickly understand the importance of a V-bottom to deflect the blast. I did not see the importance, and I appreciate you folks walking me through the importance of getting rid of the fuel tanks, because it makes no difference if you survive the blast only to incinerate the crew inside. So you've got some challenges. I want you to walk this committee through those challenges. But there are some simple manufacturing processes that I don't see in place that need to be in place. And again, I got to believe it's very difficult to hire somebody and tell them this is just to get a job done. This isn't forever. This is a task. It's going to be for 1 year. But that's just the way it is. This is a rescue mission for those 168,000 Americans in Iraq and the other 30,000 that are in Afghanistan. And you know what? People did come down to South Mississippi and New Orleans for 1 year jobs cleaning up after Katrina. So I think it can be done, and in this instance, it absolutely has to be done. And what I hear today is what steps are going to be taking every day to make that process faster, to make it more efficient? And what do we as a Congress need to do to help you in your job? Because this isn't about beating you up. This is about solving a problem.
Maybe I'd offer a few comments, Mr. Chairman, and then see if I've addressed your question. But one of the ways I mentioned we delivered 161 vehicles in July. We did that because we had multiple vendors, and indeed we have two categories of variants. The category ones carry 2 operators and 4 passengers. The category 2s carry 2 operators or vehicle operators and 8 passengers. So 5 vendors, and then most of them have both categories, so you're up to 8 or 10 different types. And then if you have Army and Marine Corps unique installations of those vehicles, a lot of variants. We took the approach to get vehicles as fast as possible to utilize all the manufacturing capacity that could produce safe vehicles and get that 161. Was with some careful thought that we made a decision with the October orders, for which the Congress provided funds in the continuing resolution, that we necked down to 3 vendors, 2 Category 1 types and 2 Category 2 types. They are the vehicles with the largest payload. At that point in time, there were 2 factors to that. One, those vehicles having the largest payload have the best capacity to carry additional armor and additional equipment. And 2, because we've now moved from July to August, September, and October, those vendors can now keep and build towards that rate and satisfy the desire to build 1,100, 1,200 vehicles per month. So we believe this is the fastest path to the most vehicles at rate and to address the issues you're properly raising. Those were exactly our choices in making that decision, is if we reduce the number of varieties of vehicles, we can process them through the SPAY-WAR installation process of government-furnished equipment faster, get them to the field faster, and reduce the burden on the troops in the field of having different vehicles, each with some different installation, which might have to be repaired. They've got a job to do, and it isn't to work on these vehicles. So we're making choices to get there, and I think it also addresses Chairman Abercrombie's point as we studied this when we made the decision. If we make this choice now, our long-term inventory at the end, the 15,000, will be mostly of single types of vehicles that have large payload capacities and can potentially service on the long term. So we tried to address the short-term demand to get as many vehicles as fast as possible. If they provided better protection than up-armored Humvees, we did that. We're now narrowing the scope to continue to build as fast as possible, but deliver a smaller set of variants so that they can be more easily outfitted at Charleston and then more easily maintained and supported in theater. And that's those are the 2 strategies we've employed to try to address, I think, both of your concerns, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Young, again, as I've mentioned, we have 3 votes. We're going to try to get through them as quickly as possible. So the committee is going to declare a 30-minute recess. We'll be back at 5 minutes after the hour.